Hey, good evening. Hope you are all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Zevachim. We're starting at the bottom of Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, 6, 7 lines from the bottom, at Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Mirza Hashem will get to, we'll see how far we get, hopefully to the top of Chaf Daled Amud Aleph, so we can make some good progress. We're almost caught up to where we should be, according to this. Where are we? Today is Aleph D'Chol HaMoed. Today's Chaf Hey. So if we finish where we should tonight, and we do one more night of two blot, we'll be caught up in Mirza Hashem. Big thank you to the Chabura for covering my absence.
Tomorrow night is at what time?
Oh my gosh, no. You're right. That was a terrible idea, is what that was. It wasn't a Freudian slip.
Shabbos, we'll do a little extra.
That's fine. That's fine.
We'll be fine.
Yeah. Maybe 2 more days of two blot. Let's see. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihye b'dvaro. There's no more sugar drinks in the fridge, by the way. That's got to change.
I reached behind and got it. Listen.
All right.
Good.
You're a good man. I should have asked you for the sugar. Okay. Here we go. 6 lines from the bottom on Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Reish Lakish. May mikvah ksherim and may kiur. Granted, a little bit unique, but let's say the kiur was a little bit low on water. We know that there was a minimum volume of water for the kiur, which was enough to service 4 kohanim. And if it's running low, you can go into the mikvah. You can get a bucket and then pour it from the mikvah into the kiur. But the Gemara has a problem with this. The Maimer, that seems to imply that when it comes to the kiur, the lo mayim chaim ninu, that the water that is used to fill the mikvah, and therefore the water that's used to wash, to do kiddush yadayim reglaim, is lo mayim chaim ninu. That's what it seems to imply, because even though mikvahs are connected to rainwater, but they themselves are not a spring, they're not a geyser, it's not fresh flowing water that comes out of the ground. And from the Gemara's question, it seems that should have been the standard. Why would we have thought such a thing? Because v'hatanya, we have a brisa. The pasuk says b'mayim, and let's read the pasuk, bottom of Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, 4 or 5 lines from the bottom. The pasuk, I'll read in full, says v'hakerev v'hakiro'aim yerchatz b'mayim. We're talking about an ola. You need to wash it with water. Now the word b'mayim has some drashas to it. B'mayim, 5 lines from the bottom, v'lo b'yayin. Don't know what the Havamina was, but the Gemara is saying, yes, you're supposed to wash the meat, but you're not supposed to wash it with wine. And b'mayim, another drasha from the same word, v'lo b'mazuk. Not only can you not use very heavy, thick wine, the actual straight undiluted wine, nor can you use diluted wine. B'mayim, l'rabos sha'ar mayim. What does mayim actually mean? To say other kinds of water. And then the Brisa concludes with a line that's going to be the crux of our question. The kal v'chomer l'mei kior, meaning regular water works to rinse off the ola, yerchatz b'mayim. That's true. But the kal v'chomer l'mei kior, all the more so when it comes to mei kior, which means that regular water is sufficient, but mei kior is, of course, sufficient. Why would we say that? My kal v'chomer l'mei kior. Lav, doesn't that mean that regular water is different than mei kior in that demayim chaim ninhu, that the waters that are needed for the mei kior are mayim chaim, that they're brought from a spring or from a geyser or some natural source of water? That's a great chomer, right? That would have helped us to understand what the Gemara was bothered by when Rav Yirmiyah said in the name of Reish Lakish that you can use a mikvah for mei kior. You can do that. Hooray! We see in the Brisa not that way. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not what the kal v'chomer means when it says kal v'chomer l'mei kior. Rather, to say not that it's mayim chaim, but maybe the kaddish, maybe that the water in the kior was made holy because it was in a kli shares. I could totally understand that. That makes sense. So maybe we misread the kal v'chomer. Says the Gemara, not so simple. The kaddish, the fact that something is so holy, that's ma'al yusahi, lav dafka. And I'll show you, says the Gemara, how I know that the fact that the waters in the kior were holier, and they were, granted, but it didn't help the cause. Because the Gemara says, V'hatana debei Shmuel. This phrase of Tana debei Shmuel is subject to a machlokes, Rashi Tosfos on the spot. Take a look at the bottom of the page. V'hatana debei Shmuel, lo yodana ahecha koi. I don't know what he's talking about. This source of Tana debei Shmuel. Tosfos, kan pirish dibra maschil. V'ha Tana debei Shmuel, pirish b'kuntras lo yadana ahecha koi. Umiu, what's he talking about? But Torah's Kohanim Tanya. So they have a very odd machlokas as to what this source is.
This continues, at least in the brackets,
like Yervakrayim, which
Yeah,
which
yeah.
Rashi you just quoted above.
No. Tosfos is agreeing to the content, but the authorship of Tana Debei Shmuel, that part. If you look at the remainder of Tosfos, it doesn't say Tana Debei Shmuel, but the nakuda that's being made is what we're about to see is water that has a shem levoy that has like a title to it. It's not just water, but it's mei kior, for example. So yeah, Tosfos says he quotes exactly like you said. Yachol shneimar be'af mei to some whatever the case. So we're going to see a little bit of this in the Gemara, but what Tosas was pressing on was that the name. What you're right. Maybe I agree about the name, but the idea was still taught. An interesting machlokas. Not very common to see that from Rashi. Also, they were two generations apart. Publication wasn't on the rise at that time. The printing press didn't really exist at that time. We had good few hundred years to go. Maybe 200 years by the end of his life, 250, we had some time. So it wasn't like a rapid time of publication. So they should have had this very similar materials. That's that is a very valid point. Maybe Rashi should have had more than his grandchildren. Anyways, what was in this little brisa, or I guess Torah's Kohanim in the Medrash? So the Gemara says that Mayim she'ein lahem shem levai. What waters do we say are the appropriate waters to use? So if you look at the rest of Rashi, Rashi says Umiyu shamin and mina dehecha dechsiv mayim stama in make kior ksherin in yes may kior hecha dechsiv mayim stama, but ein make kior ksherin lo, because make kior is not mayim stam. It has a title to it. That's what the Gemara says. Mayim she'ein lehem shem levoy. Yatsa make kior she'yesh lehem shem levoy. So you wanted to say that the kal v'chomer in the brisa, which indicated that the kior nitz mayim chayim, that was Maila because it was a kadosh. That was the kal. No, it can't be because of kedusha, because if it's because of kedusha, it's the shem levoy. That doesn't work at all. Halalav. It must be like we said earlier, deru'uyin lemei that the waters are for mekior alma mayim chaim ninhu. The kal v'chomer has to be about the fact that the waters for the mekior have to be from mayim chaim. So that's a kasha. And the Gemara acquiesces by pointing out that there's a machlokas tanaim about this topic as to whether or not we allow mei mikvah to fill a kior. How so? Tanoihi. We have a brisa in Maseches Sota quoted in the name first of Rav Yochanan the Amora, the Amor Rav Yochanan, and here's where the brisa starts. Mei kior, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, mei ma'ayanhein, that the waters of the kior can only be fulfilled by the springs and not by a mikvah. And v'chachamim Omer, sha'ar mei mosein, doesn't matter. You can get the water for the mei kior from anywhere. End of sugya. Now let's talk about Orel. The Mishnah had taught us that if the Kohen who was doing the avoda was an Orel, that it would passel the avoda that he was doing. Obviously, it was mevatel mitzvah saseh, but we have to figure out the Marimokamos as to where the psul is in regards to doing the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash. Minalan chaf beis and beis, 5 lines down at the 2 dots. Amar Rav Chizda, davar zeh mitoras Moshe Rabbeinu lo lamadnu. It wasn't clear to us from Chumash, from the 5 books, that it wasn't clear to us that an Orel can't do avoda, which is shtickle pella. I'm surprised we didn't make a tzushtel from the fact that if you couldn't even eat the korban pesach as an Orel, if you couldn't even eat it, pasha, you couldn't be the Kohen. I would have thought, but the Gemara says that we don't have any mar mekom. That's an unbelievable thing. Yeah. Hello, Dad. That right here, it's 5, 6 lines down. Chaf beis and mid beis. So we didn't learn it from Moshe. Midivrei Yechezkel ben Buzi lamadnu. We learned it from Yechezkel. This Gemara we saw out of context a little bit earlier. What does the pasuk say over there in Yechezkel Mem Dalid? The pasuk says, "Kol ben nechar erel lev erel basar lo yavo el mikdashi." The pasuk does not have the next word, the shorseni, and the pasuk seems to say that a ben nechar. We're going to define that momentarily. An erel lev. We're going to define that momentarily. And the erel basar. I think we know what that means. Lo yavu el mikdashi. Okay, so they shouldn't come into the mikdash. But how would we know that it's le'ikuva? How would we know that if they do an avoda, an erel basar, that it's going to be problematic? Umanolan demachli avoda dechsiv. The pasuk says 2 psukim earlier, ba'aviachem b'nei nechar arle leva arle basar lios b'mikdashi lechalalo es beisi. Lechalalo es beisi means to profane my house, meaning you were mechalal, you ruined it. That means that if a Kohen is an Orel, and as we pointed out when this came up in the Mishnah at the open of the Perek, even if he had a good reason why he was an Orel. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Even if a person never had a bris because their older brothers were circumcised and died from, even all the Purim that we know about doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Tanu Rabbanan, the Brisa says Ben Nechar, we're a quarter of the way down on Chav Beis and Beis. Yachal Ben Nechar Mamish. Maybe what the pasuk in Yechezkel means is that a goy can't do the avoda. It's an interesting havamina. The Gemara says Talmud Lomar Erel Leiv. No, we're talking about someone who doesn't have a psul be'etzem that they are a goy, but rather someone who has Erel Leiv. There's something wrong with their thinking, with their hashkafas. There's something wrong with them. They're not a mami, and something's wrong with their hashkafas. Ben Nechar. Okay, if you're saying that the Kohen that we're worried about is Erel Leiv, that he's a problematic Kohen because of his hashkafas, why'd you call him a Ben Nechar? Says the Gemara, "Shenisnakru ma'asav la'aviv shabashamayim." His maisim are nisnakru; they're foreign from Ben Nechar, a stranger, something he thinks in a weird way. I work with a surgeon for adult circumcisions, and he said to me, "If the person is a Jew or is a shem gerus, I'm not doing it." This is an Orthodox person, David's an Orthodox shul, and he said to me, "B'zeh lashon, I'm comfortable with my hashkafas. You would not be comfortable with my hashkafas." This is what he said to me. He said, "I do not want the achrayas of," and he used the word achrayas. So it's just that's error. No, I'm not saying about him, but that concept is maybe I'm saying about him, I don't know. But that's an error lev. Is someone who their hashkafas are chrome.
Say the Shali down.
I don't know what Shali down is. So that's what the Gemara says. So that's why the language is Ben Nechar. Really, that is a name for Shegitz. That's not a name for a Yid. But what we're talking about is a Kohen who's error lev. The ainly ella erelev. So that had I only had erelev, I would have only known about someone who has krum ashkafas, erel basar minayin. What about an uncircumcised person? Tamalamar ve erel basar vitzrichi. And I need both of these mar mekomos. The ikas of rachmana erel basar. If I would have only had erel basar and not erelev, that's mishum demois. There's something physically grotesque about it. I'm not interested. It's gross. Aval erelev delomais. Okay, you have bad ashkafas, but physically you're not. There's nothing wrong with you. So Eimala, I might have thought that the halacha would have been different, and perhaps we wouldn't have passed the korban done by an erelev. V'yashmin an erelev mishum de'en libo l'shamayim. He's not really thinking about the Eibishter. So yeah, fine. That makes a lot of sense to me. That this person's philosophies are not aligned with Torah Ashkafa. Fine. Aval erel basar de'libo l'shamayim. Eimala, but a person's an erel basar can erel chayid. He couldn't have a circumcision. He's pater. He's He's exempt from being circumcised. But maybe that should have still been kosher. You have people who have tzitzin hama'akvin amila. I see this all the time. People whose brisim are not halachically kosher, even though they may have been gemalt by a mo, but things happen, whatever. So maybe we should say, okay, l'chora, that a person who has tzitzin hama'akvin amila can because avoda would be psula. You have to redo the bris. Tzrichi. Therefore, we needed to have both erelev, and erel basar. We're now going to talk about what the Mishnah says about a tameh, that if the Kohen is tameh, that his avoda is pasul. This piece of Gemara is challenging. The start is not so hard, but as you'll see, the back and forth is over the next amud, requires you to hold cup for about an amud. Okay, says the Gemara, halfway down on Chav Beis and Beis, Amru Ziknei Darum, the Ziknei Darum, the wise people of the south, which is a little bit of just a group of people. We don't doesn't say who their names are, but this was obviously like a bezdin in the south. What did they say about the Mishnah when it says that the Kohen who's tameh, his avodah is pasul? So the Gemara says, Lo shanu, when does this apply? They're only pasul ella tameh sheretz. Only if they became tameh through tumas sheretz, one of the main shratim that makes a person tameh. Aval tameh meis. But if, shockingly, they were tameh meis, which is a more chamor tuma, because there is no more chamor tuma than meis. But if their tuma was tumas meis, mitoch shemiratze b'tzibur, because there are times that tumas meis can be miratze b'tzibur, specifically by a korban pesach when rov of the tzibur is tameh meis. So if this kohen was tameh with tumas meis, miratze nami b'yochid. So that we're mechadesh that he's miratze nami b'yochid, that he would even be able to do a korban b'yachid. Rashi does point out at the top of the page, 7 lines down to Rasul Miratz b'yachid, diavad, al yedei shahatzitz miratze alav. It's not lechatchila. It's just that if he were to, this Kohen, who could have done a korban b'tzibur lechatchila in a case of hutra b'tzibur, let's say rov of Bnei Yisrael were tamei, there's no paraduma. So b'di'evet, that same Kohen, if he does an avoda b'yachid kosher, which is this whole din of them is very shocking because the tumas sheretz is a lesser tuma than tumas mates. That's really what we're going to be discussing. What kind of shita is this that we ignore the fact that tumas mace is? You're right. Granted, tuma hutra b'tzibur. Granted, I agree by tumas mace. But you're going to say that the Mishnah, when it said that a Kohen's tameh to do the avoda, that it's only by a sheretz and not by tumas mace, it's very difficult. Says the Gemara, Ihachi, if what you're saying is true, referring to the sheet of the Ziknei Darim, tameh sheretz nami, lesi bekal v'chomer mitame mace. I could give you a beautiful kal v'chomer that tumas sheretz should also be mutter. How so? Ma tameh mace. When it comes to a tameh mace, a person who's tameh tumas mace, shaton hazosh lishu shvi'i, that person needs to get out of their tameh state by having hazah from the paraduma on the third and seventh day of their tuma. And there we said miratzeh. So then tameh sheretz she'eno ton hazah gimel v'shvi, eno din shemiratzeh. Like what that this is the fundamental question of the Gemara is how could you say that sheretz, which is a lesser tuma than tumas mace, how could you say that the Mishnah is only saying that if you're a Kohen who's tameh by tumas sheretz, that's when you're possible, but if you were tameh tumas mace, it would be kosher b'di'evet? How can that be? Look at this kal v'chomer. Says the Gemara, the reason why the Ziknei Darom were holding stark in this shita, that tuma of our Mishnah was referring to tumas sheretz and not tumas mace, was kosavre, they held Kasavne Ziknei Daram, the Mechaprin, Miskaprin. The Mechaprin, the ones who cause kapara, the Kohanim, are like the Miskaprin, the ones who are getting kapara, namely Klal Yisrael. The Kohanim are equivalent to Klal Yisrael. How so? Ma Miskaprin, just like the recipients of kapara, Bnei Yisrael, Tamei Mace in, Tamei Sheretz Lo, that they, if they were Tamei Mace, they can have Ritsui, because again, Tuma Hutra B'tzibur. But had they been Tamei Sheretz, they could not. We don't have this general sweeping principle that if half of Klal Yisrael was Tamei Tumas Sheretz, we still allow the Korban Pesach. We don't. So therefore, they held that the Mechaprin and the Miskaprin were the same. Af Mechaprin, if that's true by the Miskaprin, by Bnei Yisrael, the recipients of Kapara, it's also true by those who give out Kapara, quote unquote, those who are, they don't give out Kapara, but they're doing the dirty work, which is the Kohanim. Tamei Mace in Tamei Sheretz Lo. This is the Shita, this is the Lamdus behind the Ziknei Darim, which is that they hold that the Mechaprin are like the Miskaprin, and therefore we say that only Tumas Mace is allowed, but Tumas Sheretz is still not allowed. If the Kohen in our Mishnah was Tamei Tumas Sheretz, he could not do the Avodah, Masha Ein Kain, Tamei Mace. So we asked and answered, which means that right now the core of the Shita of the Ziknei Darim is that they hold the Mechaprin are like the Miskaprin. So says the Gemara, hold on, we need to analyze this idea that the Mechaprin and the Miskaprin are the same. 2/3 of the way down on Chav Beis and Beis. My kasavre, what is it that the Ziknei Darim hold? I kasavre, that when it comes to Tumas Sheretz, that Ein Shochtin Bezorkin Al Tmei Sheretz, that other people are not allowed to bring the korban of someone who's Tamei B'Sheretz. So let's say that I was Tamei B'Sheretz, but I had to bring a korban. If we say that if I'm Tamei B'Sheretz, you, the Kohen, cannot bring my korban, Amai lo avdei tzibur betuma. Why would we not allow my korban as an individual member of Klal Yisrael, even though I'm Tamei Sheretz? Why would we not allow it to be brought? After all, we have a general rule. Hakol shebiyachid nidche tzibur avdei betuma. This is a klal when it comes to pushing off the korban pesach. Any problem with a korban or a person that when dealing with a yachid, that it would be nidche, which means, let's say I was Tamei Tumas Sheretz on Yud Daled Nisan. If I'm Tamei Tumas Sheretz at that time, what would we say to me? I'm a consumer. I'm Tamei Tumas Sheretz. I go to my Rebbe. Rebbe, it's the 14th of Nisan. I'm Tamei Tumas Sheretz. What should I do? He'd say, push it off to Pesach Sheni. It's Nidche. Anything that's Nidche, by definition, Tzibur Abdei Betuma. We do allow the Tzibur to do that. So therefore, we should allow, just like we do for Tuma Hutra B'Tzibur, when 50% of the Tzibur is Tamei Tumas Mace, By our tzibur, we're all came out everyone unless you're of a frum Kohen, and even then you can't control everything.
Oh,
What?
you were probably born in a hospital.
Yeah, I'm saying the odds of not, I'd say we're whatever the numbers are, 90+% tamei meis. That I think that's a very generously low number. But especially how long have people lived in America and how many cemeteries have we bowled over and built malls and all the other things that we've done. It says the Gemara, we should have allowed that if a person was tamei tumas sheretz, that korban should be functional b'tzibur, but they didn't say that. So says the Gemara, in fact that part is true. Ella, it must be that the ziknei darom taka hold. Kasabre shochten v'zorken al tamei sheretz. We do allow that to happen. We do allow that korban to happen. So this is a modification on their shita. All of that is the introduction to the shita of the ziknei darom. Okay. Amar Ula, Taka lahu Reish Lakish lidramai. He raised his voice. He showed dislike for the shita of the dramai from the southerners. So that's what the Gemara says. And what was the pushback? V'chi eze koach meruba. What did we say was the lamdus of ziknei darom? That the mechapren were like the miskapren, the kohanim were like bnei Yisrael. But here, Reish Lakish goes to that deep lamdus and says, I disagree with your premise. If your premise is true, Ziknei Darim, I understand where you're coming from, but I disagree with your premise. Your premise was that the Mechaprin are like the Miskaprin. That's not true. Which one has more power? Koach Mechaprin or Koach Miskaprin? So the Gemara says, Have Omer, Koach Miskaprin. Jews have more power than Kohanim in the following way. When it says that Tuma is Hutra B'tzibor, if 51% of Klal Yisrael is Tameh, what's the halacha by the Korban Pesach? We move forward. If the Kohen is Tameh, we don't move forward. So who has more power? Klal Yisrael. So you, Ziknei Darom, equated Klal Yisrael and the Kohanim. No, they're not the same. The Miskaprin over here, the Jews, the people out in the pews, they have more power than the Kohanim because Tumah B'tzibur applies to Rov of B'tzibur, that's Tani, not to the Kohen, that's Tani. The Gemara shows that they are not necessarily the same. And therefore, follow along. When we have a Baal, a regular consumer, someone, a regular Yid, who becomes Tamei Tumas Sheretz, and you, the Ziknei Darom, allow your Meshalchin Korban Osein, they can send in their Korban and someone can do it in their stead. But Kohen Shenitma B'Sheretz, but a Kohen who was Tamei B'Sheretz, you, the Ziknei Darom, wanted to say that Eino Meratzeh, that they don't get Ritzui if the Kohen is Nitma B'Sheretz. Well, then Makom Shenitmu Bailim B'Meis, Shein Meshalchin Korban Osein, then had a member of the pews been Tamei Tumas Meis, he would not be able to send in his Korban. Kohen Shenitma B'Meis Eino Din Sheino Meratzeh. That's what we would have thought. But you already didn't say that because if you look back up at Ziknei Darom, it says that when it comes to a Kohen who's Tamei Meis, he's still Meratzeh. But the Kal V'chomer that we just said is backwards. So that's a kasha on the Ziknei Darom. Because the Ziknei Darom, the logic would imply, again, we're breaking the rule, that we're breaking their lumdus. Their lumdus was Mechapern and Miskapern are the same. But what Reish Lakish through Ula is pushing back on is that your Havamina that they're the same is wrong. And once we know that they're different, I have a Kal V'chomer, and that Kal V'chomer presses against you. Says the Gemara, Kasavre, Ziknei Darom, what do they actually hold? Tamei Meis Name Mishalech Korbanosab. There's a part of your Kal V'chomer that's wrong, which is that we hold that even if the Kohen is Tamei Meis, is that he can not the Kohen. Even if someone from the pew is a regular Jew, a regular consumer, he can also send his korban even if he's a Tamei Meis. That's a chiddush. So these shitas are very unique and very uncommon. So now let's analyze this idea that a person who's Tamei Meis is allowed to have a korban sent in and someone else can do it. Ish ish ki tamei v'asa pesach b'chodesh hasheni. What does it say when you're Tamei? You don't bring the korban on time. You're pushed off to Pesach Sheni. Goodbye. So how can you tell me Ziknei Darom that the korban is brought on time with a shliach? State in Chumash that if you are tamei on Yodal ben Harbaim, you're pushed off to Pesach Sheni. So therefore, the Gemara says, no, that's only the mitzvah. That's only lechatchila. But b'di'eved, we would not say that. Sorry, that's only lechatchila that we would push it off to Pesach Sheni. But b'di'eved, technically speaking, the Ziknei Darim are right that a korban could be brought on even on Pesach Rishon. Still, the Gemara says we have another problem. Vaksiv, turning to the top of Chaf Gim Lamed Aleph, the Gemara says, Lefi achlo, ish lefi achlo. How do we measure a chabura? So the chabura has to be ish lefi achlo. Only if a person can eat. But a tamei meis can't eat. You're not allowed to eat a korban if you're tamei meis, even if the ziknei darim would allow shlichus. But the only people who are eligible for a korban pesach are the bnei chabura. But a bnei chabura has a prerequisite, which is that he has to be able to eat, and he can't eat the korban pesach when he's tamei. So again, question thrown back to the ziknei darim: how can you say that a chabura can exist with someone who's tamei meis? It doesn't make any sense. That guy's ineligible to eat. The Gemara says the mitzvah. You're right; he's not supposed to eat lechatchila. But you're right that lechatchila, a person who is part of a chabura should be able to eat. But b'di'eved, even if he is not able to eat, it's still kosher. Says the Gemara, that's pashut not true. It's not something that we would say that is ma'akev, that you have to be able to eat when you're part of a chabura. Top of Chav Gim Lamed Aleph, end of the first line. V'atanya, we have a brisa. The michsas nefashos. What does this pasuk teach us? The lamed she'ein ha'pesach nishchat ela lemnuyah. A korban pesach is only shechted for those who are appointed, for those who are quote unquote registered for the chabura. Shachto shelo lemenuyav. What if the korban pesach was shechted for people who didn't sign up for a particular chabura? So we have chabura number 46. Our Daf Yomi shiur signs up as a chabura for the korban pesach. It's pretty gewaldic. If that's what happened, that'd be pretty amazing. Get set on the grill. Yeah, amazing. Get the spit ready. My gosh, that would be so amazing. So let's say that we had a chabura and two guys showed up who don't regularly come to Daf Yomi. We didn't think about them when we told the Kohen about our chabura. So they are shachto shelo lemnuyah. They were there. They were unregistered attendees. Yachol yeka over ala mitzvah. Says the Gemara, maybe perhaps they were over on the mitzvah. B'di'eved it would be okay. All right. Talmud lomar tachosu hakasav shina alav la'akev. We see over here that it is le'ikuva. That means that if you have someone who is shachta shelo lemnuyah, the shechita was done, the korban pesach was done for our chabura, and we had two latecomers who were not part of the chabura. No, it doesn't count for them. It only counts for the people who were registered. And now here's the key of the Gemara: the iskash ochlen lemenuyan. Those who are able to eat are the same as those who are signed up for the korban, for the chabura, for the korban pesach. And this is going to be obviously questioned in a moment. I'm not sure exactly what the link is between those two things. But what we assume from here is just like by minui, we say that it's ma'akev, we also therefore assume that if someone is not able to eat the korban pesach, they can't be part of the chabura. It's a jump. It's not the same thing. Saying that someone registers for a chabura is not the same as saying that someone who is not able to eat the chabura signed up for that. It's not the same thing, but the Gemara makes a hekesh. So therefore, kasha back on ziknei darim. If this hekesh is correct, that we are extending from menuyan, that you have to le'ikuva, you have to be registered before the kohen shechs the korban. And if we extend it to ochlin, that so too somebody who signs up for the korban pesach has to be able to eat it, which is not the case over here because these people are tamei meis. If the hekesh is real, kasha back on ziknei darim. The Gemara says, don't worry, ziknei darim lo makshi. They don't make the hekesh between ochlin and menuyan, and therefore the question completely falls away. The brisa that we just learned is only talking about one thing, which is menuyan. It's not talking about ochlin. Even if the ziknei darim are not going to make a hekesh between ochlin and menuyan, and even if that brisa is a standalone topic about menuyan, but mehanami islahu pircha, there still is a question against the ziknei darim. What's that? Follow along. We're a quarter of the way down, 10 lines down or so, a little bit less on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. Let's say that a regular consumer, someone like me, I become tamei tumas sheretz. I am allowed to send someone lechatchila. I can send my korban with a kohen. Abigali, if I'm going to say to him, please bring my korban, he'll say no problem. But a Kohen shenitma b'sheretz eino meratze. But the Kohen who himself is tamei, there's no ritzui, right? That's the din of that's their din. That was the din of the Ziknei Darum, is that they said that the Mishnah, when it said tamei pasul, was talking about a sheretz. So then makom shenitmu bailim b'meis shein mishalchen korbanos lechatchila. But when we have someone out there in the community, like myself, a regular Yisrael, who's tamei meis, and I'm not allowed to be mishalech lechatchila. I am b'diavad. Kohen shenitba b'meis eino din she'eino meratze. And that, of course, is against what the Ziknei Darim were saying, because they wanted to say that it is meratze by that particular Kohen. That's exactly what they did say. They said, if you look back at the two dots on Chav Beis and Beis, they said, Aval tamei meis mitoch shemeratze b'tzipor meratze name b'yochid. This is the exact opposite. So some shitas here in the Gemara have the word kasha. Right by, I don't know if you have a little bays over there. I have 12 lines down. I have a little bays between the words meratze and mesve. So there it says, I don't know what this acronym stands for, bays, chaf, yud, mem. I guess, I don't know exactly. Nosaf kasha. We have the extra word over here. Do you have a mark there? Yeah. What is it? What says makshi? In between the words maratza and mesve?
Mesve and Mipnei, actually.
Oh, that's different.
That's the next one, yeah.
I don't have that one. I don't have that at all, what you just said.
Makshi, Amar Rashi.
Where?
Oh, that's a different base.
Oh, okay. We have different Gemaras. Yeah. Anyways, the Gemara says, Kasha, this is considered a strong question against the Ziknei Darim, but we're not done yet. Meisvei, third of the way down. Mipnei she'amru, this is a Tosefta in Maseches Psachim. And the Gemara says as follows: Mipnei she'amru nazir ve'osa pesach. This is not one who is in both of these categories, but a nazir and also not someone who is both, but a nazir and also the concept of korban pesach. It's the Brisa says, the Tosefta says, "Hatzitz meratze al tumas dam ve'ein hatzitz meratze al tumas haguf." There it says that the tzitz is meratze on blood, but it's not meratze on a person who's tamei. B'mai. What does this Tosefta mean? Ilema betumas sheretz ha'amres. If you want to say that by that we're talking about in regards to the korban pesach that someone's tamei tumas sheretz, that can't be because ha'amres. I said ha'amres incorrectly. Betumas sheretz kama ha'amres shochten v'zorken al tumas sheretz. You already said that we learned earlier. The Ziknei Darim already hold that one is allowed to give another person to do shchita of his rika, so that can't be that the tzitz is maratza there. I don't need a tzitz in that case. It's mutter b'di'evet. Ela, it must be tumas meis. That's where we need the tzitz to be maratza, and maybe that's what it's talking about on the tumas dam. So says the Gemara, "V'katani eina tzitz maratza alma nitmu ba'alim b'meis ein mishalchen korban osein." Kasha again on Ziknei Darim. So much pressure on the Ziknei Darim. Their sheet is very weird, and the Gemara is really pressing heavily on them. So the Gemara says, no, that's not the case. Rather, ida itma bailim b'meis hachanami. Had it been that the bailim were tamei, I would agree with you that ein mishalchen korban osein hacha b'may askinon. What's going on in this Tosefta when it's talking about a tzitz miratze? That's not talking about a regular person in the pews. Rather, kigon shenitma kohen b'sheretz. And the Ziknei Darim are mechalek between a kohen who may need ritzui, but the regular person in the pews doesn't need ritzui because they already said that lechatchila sheretz can be brought by other people. Yachi says the Gemara, if it's true that this first part of the brisa, we're making an ukimta that is talking about the kohen, and that is talking about a sheretz, ema seifa. What about the seifa? Nitma tumas hatahom hatzitz miratze. The tumas hatahom is what we were just talking about earlier, just happenstance, as it were, or behashgacha pratis, is that I'm sure many of us have walked over a dead body unbeknownst to us. I can't imagine we haven't. I'm just saying, we've walked hundreds of miles, 1,000 miles in our life. I don't know how long. I don't know.
Anyone that's been to Europe, ever.
Ever. But even America, like even before the roads were paved, we have no idea. I mean, there's been people here a while, it doesn't take much. Even if you've ever walked by a cemetery, like there's cemeteries that are just not well kept and bodies move, and I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, unless you push it, stay at home, and even then, who knows what's under your home, I'm sure we're all tamei with tumas tahom. That the tumas tahom is that it's ola adla rakia, unless there's tefach gola within the aron in which the body is in, which helps to prevent tuma for planes and those kinds of things, for things above us. So what does the Gemara say in the Seifa? Hatzitz meratzeh. The tzitz helps for that. So if I were to bring a korban and I was tamei, but only tamei b'tumas hatahom, the tzitz would help. So says the Gemara, Hatani Reb Chia. What did we learn about that? Lo amru tumas hatahom el lemes bilvad. The only time we even talk about tumas hatahom is in regards to dead people, not in regards to shratzim. So says the Gemara, lemes lemeute mai. Lav lemeute tumas hatahom de sheretz. It must be that we're not talking about the case of sheretz. Says the Gemara, lo, not necessarily. It could be lemeute tumas hatahom de ziva. Maybe there's some garment that's tamei b'tumas zav from back in the day. They used to wear a kiss. Men used to wear a kiss around their gate in order to collect all of the discharge. So maybe there's something that's tamei. Maybe that's what the tumas hatahom is all about. Says the Gemara, wait one second. If that's true, then we have an answer to a question that Rami Bar Chama asked. He said, Kohen hamaratze b'korban oseim, hutra lo tumas hatahom, o lo hutra lo tumas hatahom. He asked this as a question. Why did he ask it as a question if we have the answer? Tif shota tumas hatahom hutra lo, daha hacha b'kohen kaimina. We know this already. We learned this already just now. That tumas hatahom is mutter. We learned it from the Tosefta Maseches Psachim. Why doesn't Rami Bar Chama just say the answer to the question from there? Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. The Rami Bar Chama vadai pliga. Rami Bar Chama doesn't agree. I have to figure out how it is that he doesn't agree with all the details here. But Rashi points out a little bit over here that he's not arguing on the brisa directly. To Rami Bar Chama, paliku adezikne darum hu mokim lahu betumas bailim usfir de'en yachitami meis mishalech korbanos de'achilas psachim me'akev. So this Rashi actually does nicely summarize the sugya, but it is a complex sugya. Anyways, Rami Bar Chama doesn't agree with what we've presented so far with the ziknei daram. Toshma, let's see a brisa on a similar topic. V'nosa Aharon es avon hakodashim. What is this pasuk talking about? So this pasuk's talking about the tzitz. If you look at the pasuk on the side, Shmos Kavches, Ve'aya al meitzach Aharon. It was on the forehead of Aaron, v'nasa Aaron es avon hakodashim, and he would carry, meaning he would be meratzeh for the avon of kodshim. So let's look in the Gemara. V'chi eze avon nose. What sin was he actually carrying? Turning to Chav Gimel Amud Beis. What was the tzitz actually doing? Im avon pigul. If he was talking about pigul, we don't need that because the tzitz won't help for pigul. Why not? Because the Torah says the tzitz won't help for pigul. Hareg kvar ne'amar lo yechashed. That won't help. There is no ritzui. And if the pasuk meant when it said that Aaron would be nose avon of the kodshim, even avon nosar there too. Hareg kvar ne'amar lo yeratzeh. The only thing the meratzeh would do is if there's too much of a tzibur. My tuma, what tuma are we talking about? We don't have a broad sweeping heter around the sheretz. The only place we have a broad sweeping heter is around tumas meis. Therefore, ela tumas meis. It must be that we're talking about where the bailim, where the regular people became tamei b'meis. Alma, what do we see from here? Nitmeu bailim b'meis mishalchin korbanos. We see over here that they do bring their korbanos. Qualifies the Gemara ubemai. And in what case are we talking about? Ibn Nazir. If you want to say that a Nazir is allowed to do this, that's not possible. And a Nazir is therefore never allowed to bring korbanos, even b'di'evet, if he's tamei meis. Ella, it must be that there is ritzui. What did the brisa mean when it said that there's avon kodashim, that it was helping? What did the pasuk mean? Only by la'osa pesach. So therefore, this then poses a question again on the powers that be from Ziknei Darim. So says the Gemara, really la'olam b'sheretz. Really, we were talking about a tumas sheretz and b'shem tuma ba'olam. You're right that there is no sweeping heter by sheretz like hotra tuma hotra b'tzibur. That we know, but there is it's in the camp of tuma broadly, even if it's going to be about a sheretz, but even if it's not going to be about a sheretz, but sheretz is part of tuma also, so we allow for that to happen. Just a couple more lines and then we'll stop. Some learn what we just learned a little bit different. Avona kodashim, in that when we talk about when the korban becomes tamei, in, yes, that's going to be the case that That's going to be the case that the tzitz is maratza. Avon makdishim, the one is of the meat, but the avon makdishim of the kohanim lo, that won't help them. My tuma, what tuma does this kohen have that it doesn't help? Ilema tuma sheretz mi ishtari b'tzibur. This is again very similar to the previous version. We have no broad sweeping heter with a sheret. That's only b'tzibur. Elalav, it must be tumas mates. It must be that we're talking about tumas mates. For avon kodshim in and avon makdishim lo. We see a distinction between kodshim, the animal itself, where there is ritzui, and avon makdishim, that is talking about the kohanim themselves, lo, which is again a question on the ziknei dorim. Olam tumas sheretz v'shem tuma bo'olam. So how the Gemara responds that it could be that it is talking about sheretz, and the sheretz is talking about shem tuma bo'olam. That even though you're right that there is no principle of tuma hutra b'tzibur when it comes to sheretz, but because sheretz is part of the whole camp of tuma, we do allow for this to be a broad enough answer. This is a very complex sugya with the ziknei darim. If you have a few minutes, you should review it. It's hard. I've learned this Gemara 6 times, and it's still, there are pieces I would love to click together a little bit tighter. We'll pause right here at the 2 dots, a little bit more than halfway down on Chaf Gimel Amud Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.